This is Suchitra Vijayan, and you're joining us for the Polis Project's weekly dispatcher series. This week, Cynthia Stephen, scholar, journalist, author, and many, many other things, will be guest hosting the segment. For all of us, the segment remains the same. We look forward to a robust conversation about what death penalty means in relationship to caste and access to justice in India. We will keep taking audience questions, so please send in your questions. This segment is produced by Vaishali Patra and Anika Singh. Cynthia, the stage is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Polis Project and Suchitra, for having us and for agreeing to take on this important topic. It's something that's very close to all of our hearts here in the human rights community. And particularly here in Bangalore, we've got a vibrant set of people who've been working on this. And two of these people are our guests today. One is Kunal Ambasta, who is Assistant Professor, National Law School of India, University, Bangalore. And his areas of research includes criminal justice and sentencing. He writes also on these issues prolifically, and he has also worked on cases involving capital sentencing in India. So we do look forward to seeing a huge, hear to hearing him voice the various concerns relating to the legal aspects of the issue, which is quite huge in India because in recent years we've had a number of, for a long time, there were no capital punishments, and suddenly we had a rash of them. So there are other reasons for that, but about the issue itself, I think we will hear from him. Uh,
Thanks.
Jairam
Thanks.
is an independent journalist based in Bangalore. He has worked with the Press Trust of India and also agents France Press in Beijing and in Hong Kong, respectively. And he has also studied human rights law in Hong Kong and continues to have a very keen focus on the issue of capital punishment. And he keeps working on it throughout the year. Presently, he works as editor and translator for a number of NGOs and academic institutions. He works well, hold your breaths, French and Chinese. So we welcome to the show Jairam, and so going forward, we will start with Kunal Ambasta, who will talk for about 10, 12 minutes, maybe 15.
Sure.
Jairam also, and the same amount of time, and then we'll take a lot of time for our audience questions. But before we let Kunal go into the issue itself, I think I'd just like to open by saying that the death penalty or capital punishment, as it's known in legalese, it's a very important question. A lot of countries in the world have abolished the death penalty in preference for life imprisonment. And I think, as a person who has been keenly involved in this, in overall on human rights issues, and especially in cases of, involving capital punishment, I have had a lot of interest in that area. But I'd like to specifically put a context here of, the choice of sexual, not the choice, but the demand for capital punishments for people who are convicted of sexual violence against women in India. And we saw recently that there were 4 executions after 7 years after the famous Nirbhaya or Jyoti Singh case. And right now the country is roiled by the Hathras case, and the family has already called for capital punishment for the accused. And that because the victims and the perpetrator are from different castes, particularly the victim's family is from the Dalit community, and the perpetrators are all from a particular very powerfully dominant caste group. There has been mobilization on against any kind of punishment for these individuals. As a result, we really need to understand how these things operate, and that is why the topic today is about caste and access to justice. So now we'll ask Kunal to talk to us about the importance not only of uh, capital punishment per se, but place it in the context of India's caste situation, the the way the judicial system is structured, who are the courts, who are the judges working in courts, what is their social location, and who are the people who are incarcerated in prisons, whether
Right.
they are, what is their caste compensation composition, and how does this uh, this interplay in the conviction and in sentencing.
Right.
Over to Kunal now.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you, Cynthia. And I would also like to thank the Polis Project as well as Suchitra for giving me this opportunity to talk to you all today on the death penalty. Now, I, I would uh, I would like to set a brief context of the death penalty in what Cynthia has already said, and it's a very important question to juxtapose the issue of capital sentencing within caste realities and the realities of the prison system and the justice system in India. So, very briefly, I will attempt to do that. And I will also, of course, take questions, etc., if there are any later. And I look forward to discussing this with my co panelists as well. Right. Now, it is absolutely a right thing to say factually that if one looks at the Indian legal system, there is death penalty for a variety of offences that is prescribed. Right. This goes from, let's say, crimes such as murder or the killing, the willful killing of someone, to crimes related to the unlawful use of arms, to caste related crimes, to crimes of a sexual nature as well, right? And if one traces how the law is changing, what one finds out is that it's very clear that our substantive criminal law is shifting towards adopting the death penalty more and more for more and more crimes, which is quite interesting in a global context, which is gradually moving away from the death penalty, with more countries now having abolished the death penalty in practice or on their laws as well, than the countries that retain it. Now, specifically, we'll talk about caste and how this must work or should work. Now, what one must keep in mind is when talking about any legal punishment, capital punishment being the most extreme form of legal punishment, it is very interesting to note that any legal punishment is the final product of a human process. Your entire criminal justice process is a human process, which is peopled by actors from the same society that you and I come from. So your police is comprised of people who are also from the same society. Your judges, prosecutors, defense lawyers, and prison officers are also the same people. They're coming from this particular society. In a sense, therefore, no justice system can be devised that does not mirror the biases or the structural problems of the society that it is coming from. And therefore, what I want to say is that when we talk about the criminal justice process or an adjudication process, we should not forget that this is a product of the society that we have. And currently, our society is far from being what we might call an egalitarian or an equal or a just society, with the result that you can often see biases, hierarchies, and structural forms of oppression and injustice that exist in society also being mirrored in the way actors in the criminal justice system perform. Right? Now, to place this in the context of the death penalty is unique because the death penalty itself is a unique punishment. There is no punishment known to law that can be compared to the willing taking away or the willful taking away of someone's life as a result of something that you think they have done is wrong. If all penological goals can be met by incarceration, or even an incarceration itself is problematic. I'm not suggesting that it is a perfect method, but the death penalty goes one step ahead and says, no, it is not enough that we lock you in for the rest of your life, but we are also going to take away your life in response to what you have done. So it's a unique kind of punishment, and it is a product of a wholly hierarchical and quite possibly also a system that can reflect inequalities in the way it works. If one looks at the statistics of people who get the death penalty in India, it is quite evident that you can see that there is a particular kind of culprit, or there is a particular image of a convict who gets the death penalty or is much more likely to get the death penalty. And I am not saying this. This was said by Justice Krishna Iyer himself, who said that the death penalty in India has a color bar and a caste bias. Right? Now, if you see, overwhelmingly people on the death row, or even apart from the death row in prisons in India, belong to particular classes of people who are economically weak, belong to certain castes which have been structurally, hierarchically suppressed over history, over time, or belong to minority communities which face systematic discrimination. This is not to say that every death row prisoner corresponds to these characteristics. It's a statistical number, and an overwhelmingly disproportionate number can be said to belong to these particular categories. Now, it is therefore quite evident also that the death penalty shows some kind of disproportionate bias towards punishing the have-nots. And this adds to the structural problems that the criminal justice system might have. Why I say this is because, of course, this structural bias even exists when death penalty is not involved, in terms of who gets arrested, who does not get bail, who gets convicted, etc., etc. But when it comes to the death penalty, it has disastrous results, because the death penalty is the only penalty which can never be reversed once it is carried out, and therefore is a unique punishment. And I will keep on saying this again and again, that you cannot compare the death penalty to any other form of punishment, because it is unique in its effects. No other punishment has the same effect. Now, very quickly, to look at where criminal law is going in this country, you have statistics on one hand which are showing to you that this system might be unjust, that this system is performing its tasks unjustly or disproportionately against a particular set of communities. Still, we see very interestingly and slightly exasperatingly that Indian criminal law is moving towards more and more retributive forms, where we are entering into a tighter embrace with the death penalty than probably we should. So, whenever a problem occurs, your first response is to have stringent laws. And it is a constant refrain of people that our laws are not stringent enough. And this manifests itself in special laws like anti-terror laws, etc., etc. as well. Very little thought, according to me, goes into the process of reform of laws and change of laws. In fact, interestingly, currently we are witness to the most hasty and the most extensive attempt to reform criminal laws in India by means of appointing a 5-member committee in Delhi predominantly, which has issues of representation, which is on a lightning pace, trying to reform all the 3 major criminal laws of India, which are the CRPC, the Indian Penal Code, and the Indian Evidence Act, which applies also to civil law. There is a lot of calls for representation and for the committee to not function. And I would request all of you to take a look at the attempts that have been made. Specifically, there is a website called Disband the Committee on that particular thing. Please go and have a look. But coming back to the point, you see, what is happening is the death penalty or more stringent punishment is often given as a universal panacea to all problems of criminal justice, whereas it solves actually no problem of criminal justice. Higher retributive punishment or harsher punishment by itself cannot cannot itself take care of the problem. In the context of sexual offenses, let me very quickly say that, and I'll conclude and hand over to Cynthia, back to Cynthia, since you framed it in that particular issue. So we have a rampant problem of sexual offenses in India. There is no denying that, right? There is no denying the fact that we have a high rate of incidence of sexual offenses. We have a low conviction rate. Victims face structural problems in accessing justice. We need a conversation on all of these particular issues. We particularly need a conversation of where sexual offenses take place in communal context, whether it be caste atrocities or in communal riots, etc. We need to approach the problem of sexual offenses from a socio legal perspective, which requires several measures, which requires a lot of things to actually be done. If you see the Justice Verma Committee report, it actually makes an attempt to engage on a larger level with what should be done with sexual offenses. But nobody has the patience for that, right? That takes time, that takes a lot of effort, that is not prone to boisterous boasting in parliament. And therefore, the end result of what we get is the bulk of the Justice Verma Committee report is neglected and ignored. And what we get are mostly only harsher laws. Where are those harsher laws now? Are they stopping the incidence of rape and sexual assault? No, right? If it were true, then probably we would not be seeing some of the high impunity sexual assault cases that are happening in this country today. I'm also not unaware of the fact that there is a caste angle here when we talk about Hathras specifically. Now, for the Dalit community, and I'm making this submission with humility because I cannot speak for their experience, and I'm aware of the fact that I cannot appropriate their demand or say their demand is unjustified because I have not faced that kind of oppression. But Dalits are predominantly on the receiving end of capital sentencing in this country, right? It is not as if the capital sentencing regime is going to be implemented fairly for Dalits. And this, I'll tie it up to the starting point of what I said. If you are saying that give this criminal justice system another strong punishment, you are giving that power to probably a person who is going to use that power against you structurally, right? So that death penalty is not going to be the solution of the structural violence that manifests itself in a criminal offense, in a brutal criminal offense against a Dalit, a member of the Dalit community. So essentially, I understand that the outrage, as it rightly should be, after Hathras is very high. But I would humbly submit that the death penalty is not a solution. It is not a structural solution to that problem. Because it might, let us just assume, it might give you justice in the Hathras case. But in 10 other cases, the same community might be at the receiving end via the police, via the courts, via the prisons of the same punishment that they might now be demanding. Right? I'm not saying that their demand is unjustified. Please, I do not mean to say that at all. But what I'm trying to say is that we need a larger conversation around the death penalty, which must be viewed as the product of a system, an extreme product of a system that might be highly skewed. Right? And therefore, to link it to justice might be a pipe dream. We are probably strengthening the hands of the state to commit more arbitrariness against us than less. Right? And with that, I'll conclude. I'll take questions, or if there is some other comment, I'll be happy to pitch it. Sorry, Cynthia, did I take too much time?
Not at all. Actually, I was just going to say you put it very succinctly, raised all the issues that are very important and germane to the question. And also you have, we now will ask Jay to make his presentation. But before we go there, I'd just like to say that I'd like to talk about 2 or 3 other very bad cases that came up in between the Jyoti Singh case and Hathras case. And those are the Unnao case, the 2 cases of rape of girls in Unnao.
Yes.
And there was the Kathua case with a little child, both of which had caste and communal aspects to them. And in all such cases, there has been this same demand of the capital punishment and so on. And also in the case of the Kathua, which was extremely problematic because it has many disturbing aspects. But the unheard of thing happened where the privileged community to which the aggressors belonged uh, were given support by the larger community, the Brahmin community there, the lawyers there agitated in support to call off the investigation or to basically interfere with the investigation. And the investigating officer was under tremendous pressure to
Yeah.
give her report.
Yeah.
So this is the context. It's becoming more and more complex, the delivery of justice and the access to justice for the marginalized, for girls, for women, for Dalits, Adivasis, and the nomadic tribes that the Kathua survivor, not survivor, the victim belong to. So in such a context, I'd like, so it seems to be a justified demand. It somehow seems to satisfy to be retributive seems to satisfy the so-called the conscience of the nation, which is why, another capital punishment took place some years ago. Everybody knows what I'm referring to. So I'd like in this context Jairam to make his presentation, please.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank Police Project and Suchitra Vijayan for hosting this. Before beginning, I just want to recall that the principal author of our Constitution, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, favored abolition of the death penalty very, very clearly. And unfortunately, his view is very considered, and why his view hasn't prevailed. And of course, the Indian Republic began with killing a man who was one of the prominent freedom struggle characters, namely M.K. Gandhi. Whatever one might think of M.K. Gandhi today in light of his revelations of his racism in South Africa or his casteism back in India, but the man was, let's say, an important figure in the freedom movement, and he was killed by a Hindu fanatic who's a hero to the villains who are ruling us now. Having said that, I just want to begin with just pointing out that tomorrow is the 18th World Day Against the Death Penalty, and this year's theme is access to counsel. So without access to effective legal representation during the from the arrest stage onwards to trial and post-trial, justice is not possible. Now, we have talked about caste. Let's also talk about community. Now, between 2004 and 2019, and I'm not mentioning the four 2012 gang rapists who were executed this year, but before, between, let me just hold this closer. Between 2004 and 2019, 4 people were executed, namely Dhananjay Chatterjee, Ajmal Kasab, Afzal Guru, and Yaqub Memon. Of these 4, I and quite a lot of people like me believe that 3 of them were most likely almost entirely innocent. Namely, Dhananjay Chatterjee. Now, despite his Bengali Brahmin-sounding surname, he was an indigent person, very poor person. Unfortunately, not having had the benefit of education, he was working as a security guard in a residential building. And we know that in Indian cities, a security guard in a residential building is one of the least paid. That's one of the least paid jobs in our cities. And he had no effective legal representation during the trial process, and a shrill campaign resulted in his being put to death in 2004. Afzal Guru. Now, entire books and erudite articles have been written on the case of Afzal Guru by the likes of Arundhati Roy, senior advocate Narita Haksar, Nirmalanshu Mukherjee, Vinod Jose, who happens to be one of our top best editors, editor of the Caravan magazine, stating that Afzal Guru was framed and he was put to death merely to satiate the collective conscience of a rather bloodthirsty society. Yaqub Memon again, he handed himself over, believing that the Indian executive and the judiciary would function fairly. Unfortunately, let him down. So on the issue of effective legal representation, again, there's the same thing that happens in the United States. African Americans who also have one this race, and there is economic deprivation, are unable to get effective legal representation during the trial stage, and therefore they end up on death row, and then it's rather late. And of course, they spend years, sometimes decades, on death row. Finally, some of them are proven innocent. Some of them shown to be innocent. Some of them, even the innocent people, sometimes get hanged, get executed rather. So that is one of the biggest problems, that has both a caste and a communal and a race element to it. I'll leave that there, and then, because we have taken we're already 26 minutes, so we'll take questions. Thanks.
There are some questions here.
Yeah.
A couple of questions.
Sure.
There is one question which talks about how does popular culture and demand by cultural figures like actors and their public call for death as justice affect the judicial and policing process?
Yes, that's an excellent question. I was just thinking of that prompted the thought. We have this badminton player, right, in Hyderabad, who, when this Hyderabad encounter killing happened, basically, extrajudicial execution. Alleged rapist being shot in cold blood by police. This person, Sania, I forget her name. She applauded that. She applauded, and when there was massive criticism, she didn't back away from it. So there is, yes, as Kunal Ambasta was saying, everyone of us belongs to the same society. We're all drawn from the same, all the cops and the Bollywood actors. Everyone is from the same churning. And yes, there is a great deal of demand for. Hello?
From the same caste society.
Yes, exactly. Same upper caste, upper caste, should I say, society. And yes, that is a horrendous influence. And we are seeing that. We are seeing that now from some of these Bollywood, Bombay film industry actors and actresses.
There's also a request for Kunal Ambasta to say a little bit more about the committee that is working on this, revamping the criminal justice laws.
Yeah, definitely, and it's a very important issue as well. So let me address that briefly with more detail than what I previously said. You see, we have in the criminal justice system in India, apart from the special laws that pertain to special kinds of crimes, like, let's say, drugs or specific kinds of sexual abuse, is predominantly made of three main laws, which are the Indian Penal Code, the Code of Criminal Procedure, and the Indian Evidence Act. The Indian Evidence Act also applies to civil cases as well. Now, these laws essentially define what can be done to a particular person. If one looks at how you are arrested, what are your rights of bail, what does the police have to do, and if they don't do that in a specific timeline, do you get bail, etc., etc. Your procedural rights, your substantive rights are defined in the criminal context in this particular set of legislation. Therefore, these are very important laws that encapsulate very important rights. Now, what is currently underway is that there is an extremely hasty and problematic review and reform process of all three of these laws that is underway. Right? And it's not to say that these laws do not require amendments or that they do not require change. But because they deal with such essential rights and liberties, the least that can be done is a proper consultation and deliberation before such laws are altered. What is happening is that a selected committee comprising of 5 men has been set up to suggest reforms into all three laws, overarching reforms into all three laws, which might result in several of these rights, very essential procedural rights, being completely undone. Now, there are several problems here. One is this, that how can, in the 21st century, you have a committee suggesting overarching reforms in criminal law with no women on it, no person from an oppressed community or a marginalized community on such a committee? And specifically in the context of sexual offenses, how can you not have gender minorities, women, etc., in such a committee for deliberations? Why is the task not given to your Law Commission of India, which exists for this specific purpose of relooking at laws and suggesting reforms and amendments, etc.? And thirdly, why this unnatural haste to do this in the middle of a pandemic when consultation, deliberation, etc., is not possible? Why would you want to do this at this particular juncture and in this particular manner? There has been a concerted effort to make these points and put them across to the committee and to tell them to not proceed with this project and to not carry out this kind of hasty deliberation or amendment process or a report writing process. We also don't know how, and I'm sorry to say, but that we have very little basic information of how these members were selected and what is their mandate, what is the degree of independence, autonomy, etc., etc. What is the consultation process that they are following? Why does it not follow the same standards that Law Commission of India has followed previously, which required extensive consultation, which went on for years? And the timeline that is given to this committee is extremely short. Several representations have been made, several people have written, and there is, as I said earlier as well, there is a website up as well where you can get more information on this in all the scheduled languages of the Constitution. You can access them and you can read that website. It's called Disband the Committee, right? So if you just go there, you will get more information on this, and you can also sign on a representation if you agree that this is not the way that criminal law reform should be done.
Thank you, Kunal. I think it's a really deeply problematic and concerning issue when such very time-tested laws are being amended by a very small number of people, bypassing existing norms and institutions by a non-representative set of people. So it's something that is really worrisome at this time. There has been another question asked about whether as time passes, India has become more regressive with regard to the death penalty, and do Indians really care about this death penalty as such? So I'd like either of you or both of you to take a few minutes to respond, a few briefly.
Jairam, sir, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Just I think it's fairly clear. I think let's be quite honest and say that an overwhelming majority of Indians, if you ask them, if you stick a mic and ask them, what do you want? Yes, we want the death penalty, and that would be the case in quite a large number of societies. However, in some of the developed, let me hold this clear. In some of the developed countries, especially in Western Europe, which have abolished the death penalty now for a few decades, there is no demand to bring back the death penalty. It's only in a few regressive ones, such as Poland and Hungary, which are now ruled by right-wing regimes, that it's not the people, it's the regimes that sometimes want the death penalty to be brought back. But in most countries that have abolished, there is no such demand. And I'm quite sure if Dr. Ambedkar had been listened to and we had abolished the death penalty, and it had not been on the or had not been practiced at all for decades, that probably wouldn't have come up. But since it is there, since we do have the death penalty in our statute, it is going to be demanded. In fact, people are going to demand encounter killings. People want instant justice. That is the kind of demand that we have. So let's not be, let's be very realistic about it. It is, we have a somewhat of a bloodthirsty society.
Yeah, isn't it? It's really a saddening issue to know this. Kunal, would you like to say something?
Just very briefly, I agree with what Jairam sir has said, that a vast majority of Indians would probably want the death penalty to remain on the statute book. I will just add that I am hopeful that this position will change over time. And my reasons are, very briefly, if I can just quickly say. See, the thing is this. When you look at death penalty, our understanding is severely limited in the way that we view death penalty, generally speaking. We think of the death penalty as a synonym for justice. But if we actually knew how the death penalty works, then I think a lot of the people who support the death penalty would actually not want to have anything to do with it at all. Right? So the death penalty currently comes cloaked in legal procedure and as the verdict of a court and as executive action, etc., etc. And therefore, we think that this is something that's proper. But actually, if you find out who gets the death penalty, why is the death penalty imposed on some people and not on the others, and how do you choose who will get it and who will not get it, and what it actually entails to hang a person till death, right? And what it does to people, then you will probably not have such a vast support for it. So I'm hopeful that this position, though true today, will change with time as more and more people realize that this is not a substitute or even close to a concept of justice.
One if I may intervene here, just one very important observation that was made by the Constitutional Court of the Republic of South Africa a year after liberation. In 1994, the Mandela government, post-apartheid government, came to power. In June 1995, the Constitutional Court of the Republic of South Africa declared the death penalty to be unconstitutional. Because the interim constitution of South Africa hadn't abolished the death penalty in so many words. So therefore, it went to the Constitutional Court, and the Constitution and the very important point that was made by the presiding judge, Justice Arthur Carlson, and all the other judges, all the 11 judges of them, unanimous judgment, and some of them are the most famous jurists, world famous jurists. Justice Ismail Muhammad and Albie Sachs, Justice Albie Sachs, who, by the way, he lost an arm and an eye in a terrorist attack in Mozambique several years earlier, and he ruled that the death penalty was unconstitutional. Anyway, the point that Justice Arthur Carlson, the presiding judge, made is this: that look, if you want to go by the public opinion, then by referendum, then why don't you leave all of these matters to Parliament? But we have a constitution. A constitution is there to also protect minorities. You can't just go by majority opinion. If you only went by majority opinion, then you would minorities would be left nowhere. So therefore, a constitutional a republic that functions on constitution has to go by not just by majorities, and therefore abolition of the death penalty can be an enlightened project that is undertaken by enlightened politicians and by enlightened judges that can overrule what a majority wants. That is a very important point that was made. And when it comes to legalization of same-sex relationships and so on and so forth, you can't always go by referendum and majority opinion. You have to take an enlightened view of it. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your comments. I think there's one more question, and that's a very important question. I'd like to address it to both of you, and that is I think the question is being raised: is this revamping or whatever the committee's work or the application of laws, are they in the line of uh, promoting the Hindu Rashtra kind of mindset? Would you say that that is the drift? We notice.
I think that criminal laws are always political, that they always further
Yeah.
the powerful, and it will play to the tune of the politicians or the political forces in power. So if criminal laws can be bent to achieve that particular effect, the powers that be will bend them to achieve that particular effect. Now, very shortly, if I can say this, you see that the government exercises certain instruments of power over people, and the criminal justice system is one, right? Criminal laws is a very powerful method of control which can deprive you and I of your liberty, life, etc., etc., if it is wanted, if the government wants that to happen. And you can ultimately be acquitted and all of that can happen, but you will undergo a lot of hardship in that entire process. You will never be able to match the might of the state. When it comes to its criminal justice system, it is very mighty. It has the police force, it has its prosecutor, it has its prisons, etc., etc. And therefore, why should you be surprised that it is being used for political purposes? It's not the first time. And the death penalty is also used for political
Yeah.
purposes. The timing of executions, right? The
And
demands made
believe
publicly for death penalty, that is also used for political purposes. It's not as if it exists in a vacuum elsewhere.
I mean, in fact, Afzal Guru was put to death. Afzal Guru was put to death by the Congress because it was in a one-upmanship with BJP at that point of time. Let's not forget that. Yeah, yeah, and they will buttress caste. They will buttress of casteism and communalism. That's what's happening. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to also say that if it's not to add to what Kunal just said about the power of the might of the state and its criminal justice system. Uh, this is, you're talking about the prosecution, about sentencing, about convicting. But what about these extrajudicial killings that have become increasingly the norm in
Yeah.
say in recent past in some states? Already we talked about Hyderabad, this encounter killing in the context of a sexual violence matter, and there was so much of public approbation of that. It's difficult to understand. I mean to digest. But what about what is happening in UP, where in the
Yeah.
past couple of years, ever since the present government has been in power, the police has been used really mm, mm, like a commando force, dispensing justice on the, at the ground level, quote unquote justice, of course, not justice per se. And so we had things like demolition of buildings of the belonging to the mafia leaders, people perceived as mafia leaders and things like that, which came out because of the influence of these guys, and because they're noted to be such noted criminals or whatever. But in a routine manner, we found things like the way the Unnao cases were being handled, where the way Hathras is being handled, and the DM making amazing remarks. In the same light, I want to talk about what I saw. To my shock, I still haven't got over the shock of seeing a report in the newspaper this morning, where a certain the commissioner of a certain legal organization in Bangalore, passing strictures against his officers responding or interacting or in any way having anything to do with investigative agencies of the state. This is, they are not going to they are ordered, law officers are ordered not to respond to notices by the anti-corruption bureau or the ED or whatever. This is a bureaucrat, who is bound by duty rules, and he is asking his staff, using his administrative power, to override a criminal justice process. What is happening if the administration, judiciary, law and order machinery, everything is, undermining the rule of law in such a context. What is the access to justice to the common citizen? In this will be our closing remarks. We are almost run out of time.
You're not audible, Kunal.
Sorry, why
Yeah.
don't you go ahead first and then I'll follow?
Sorry, is that addressed to me?
I can also take it.
Take it. You please take it. Yeah, please take it.
Yeah.
There's one point about victim rights that I want to make before we close. So, but please address this one, and then I'll take that.
Right. So this last question is: given the recent arrests, how do you place these events in relation to this discussion? And I'll say what you're seeing recently happening in terms of arrests all across the country, etc. Is a very interesting phenomenon, and I've written about this separately, and that's why I wanted to talk about it a little also. Is what you're seeing is that these arrests are being made under what is called special criminal laws, such as your anti-terror laws, etc., which are investigated by special investigative agencies. Now, it's very interesting to note why these offenses are made out under those special laws. And the answer is you don't have to look very far. It's because your procedural rights are curtailed under these special laws, in a way that they are not under their general IPC, CRPC, Indian Evidence Act, etc. So essentially, this also contextualizes this process of criminal law reform, where we are creating more and more exceptions and special rules and special legislation to specifically target certain kinds of what we perceive to be crimes, right? And the way it is being invoked again shows how deeply political this entire decision-making process might be. That when do you decide to invoke a general IPC offense versus when do you decide to invoke an offense under the UAPA or previously under the TADA or POTA, right? What is that difference between that offense? Sometimes that difference is nothing to do with the offense, but a lot to do with the offender, right? Or the perceived offender. So that is what you have to look at when you see these. I always say, and I'll close with this: you can tell a lot about a country by just looking at its criminal justice system and what it's doing. Right? What are the laws? Who gets arrested? Who gets bail? Who does not get bail for years? Who gets executed? Who does not get executed? A lot of things. When does the police register the FIR? When do they say that no, there is no crime that has been committed, etc., etc.? No rape, no this, etc. A lot can be told about the country if you look at what's happening with its criminal laws. And I'll stop there. I think everyone would have understood what I want to say. Okay, so I'll stop.
Thank you.
Just one point.
Last words. Please.
Yeah, one point that I wanted to make, which we have so far not addressed, is this something called victims' rights. Now, whenever there's a major crime involving a person of the oppressor caste, or as in the United States, a white person, people talk about think of the family, think of the family of the person who was raped and murdered, or who was brutally murdered, and so on and so forth. But this somehow doesn't come up when a black person or when a Dalit has been murdered, or has been brutally murdered, raped, and so on, as we are seeing in the other case. They'll completely twist the whole narrative in such cases. Now, let's assume for the sake of argument that there is a proper justice system that is working. Now, do victim survivors, do they have a right? Now, if a person has picked your pocket, and your whole life, I'm not saying in fact in some cases pickpocket, there is a book called Factory Girls about southern Chinese factory girls who losing a mobile phone who actually meant losing a livelihood and losing contact with a fiance and so on and so forth. So such a person, does that person have a right over has a right to dictate what kind of punishment should be given to the pickpocket? Nobody would ever think of that. But when it comes to murder, rape and murder and so on and so forth, people say, well, think of the family. Now, in the United States, there is an organization called Murder Victims Families for Human Rights, MVFHR, one of whose members, I'm probably many more members, is actually a person whose daughter was raped and murdered. Now, you don't necessarily have to demand that somebody be put to death for justice. What feminists in India, feminists everywhere, leading feminists demand is certainty of justice and not the severity of justice. In fact, severity of justice is the enemy of certainty of justice, just as the best is enemy of the good. So therefore, what we want is speedy justice, certain justice, and not severe justice. That is the point. That's the point that feminists are making, and I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been a wide-ranging discussion around the issue of capital punishment, but we've also talked about access to justice and also about the system of delivery of justice and how it can be used or abused, for political reasons and powers. But I want to close on a note, taking it the thought that Jay has raised, and that is about the need for restorative justice. People's the system has to go towards not only restoration, I would say, which everybody understands, but also about reparative justice. The families of the survivors need reparation, and we need to think about what happens in the case of, say, for a child, in a case where a family, where the father kills the mother and the father is then convicted and put into life imprisonment. How will the children survive? What is the system of support for those surviving children? So I'm just making it's not an extreme situation. I've personally seen a number of such cases in my work. So therefore, with this thought that we are a society with a republican democratic constitution with strong values of liberty and equality and non-discrimination, we can aspire not only for an end to retributive justice, but also work towards reparation and restoration, and also for certainly for the abolition of death penalty in all cases. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you, Suchitra, and the Polis Project team for hosting this. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you.